بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم تقبل منا صلاة العشاء برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. As you know, when it comes to the book al-Fawz al-Kabīr في Usūl al-Tafsīr, written by Shah Waliyyullah Al-Dahlawi, alhamdulillah, is completed. As I mentioned last time, we did not necessarily go in every little detail of the book, but we went through the major points of every chapter that he has mentioned there, or almost all the chapters. Some of the chapters, maybe a few of them, were not that relevant to a gathering like this one. That's why I did not go over all of those details. I would consider them unnecessary for a gathering like this one. So today we decided to wrap it up and to have an overview look from the beginning all the way to the end. What were those topics that we covered? And maybe say a few things about all of those topics that we have covered so far, without going so much into details. This should be just kind of a summary of what we have doing for months and months now, covering this book. And again, I would remind everyone that this science, in particular the Usūl al-Tafsīr, it can be contemporary scholars, they can go more into the details of this one. There could be books with like 300, 400 pages versus the book that we have covered, which is about, less than 200 pages pretty much. But the classical scholars, they did have, less when it comes to muqaddimah, or when it comes to this introduction to these usul. Again, it depends. Some of them, they had more extended ones, but generally speaking, they had more shorter writings. So without further ado, we're going to go straight into those topics that we have covered so we can summarize them. Sisters, I would ask you kindly to please let us continue with this one. First, we talked about the 5 fundamental sciences of the Qur'an. And Imam, as a matter of fact, went through the whole book, mentioning at least like 4 or 5 times, coming back to these 5 sciences. If you remember, one of them was the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, so the verses of the Qur'an, they are all distributed on these 5 main topics, as Shah Waliyyullah considers these as sciences throughout the Qur'an. Again, verses that talk about the favors of God upon the human, the ayamillah, the days of God, the stories of the prophets, they are included in this as well. And then the third one is afterlife, Jannah, Jahannam, what the people are going to go through. So this is the world of the unseen in the future. And also number 4 is the rulings, ahkam of the Qur'an. There's a lot of verses that talk about the rulings of the Qur'an. And the 5th, the ayahs that deal with people who had the false belief. So rejecting their false beliefs. The Christians who came up with the Trinity, Jews, or Jewish people who altered their Old Testament and who did not really follow the way how they should have followed, the hypocrites, and also the kuffar, those who did not believe at all in God, idol worshippers, non-believers, atheists as we call them. So all of these categories are criticized for either having a wrong belief or having no belief or having a non-complete belief. That's the category that deals with the ayahs of refuting these groups of people, and 4 of them in particular. We also talked about naskh and mansukh. And just to wrap it up with a few sentences, we can say that nasikh is a verse that abrogates another verse. Al-Mansukh is the verse that was abrogated. right? We have this in the Qur'an. There are some verses of the Qur'an that their ruling is not valid anymore because another verse came later and it canceled the ruling of that previous verse. Without getting into the details, without getting into the examples, but we do have. So nasikh or naskh and also mansukh, these two concepts. We also talked about the asbab al-nuzul. Asbab al-nuzul, it means the reasons of the revelation. Why certain verses were revealed and based on what occasion they were revealed. I think we talked about this one often, so we do have a right understanding of the word asbab al-nuzul. Sabab is, I know that it exists in many languages, the word sabab. So asbab is the plural in the Arabic language, the reasons. Nuzul, nazala, yanzil, nuzul, it's nazlun, it's coming down or revelation. So the reasons for the revelation to come down. And then we talked also about the structure of the Qur'an. The structure, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has structured the surahs. And Shah Waliyyullah mentioned here that we have the sab'a. Sab'a is 7 of the long surahs. Sab'a tiwal, the 7 long surahs. And then we have the mi'un. Mi'un is the 100. What does that mean, 100? So these surahs, they have 100 or a little bit over 100. That's the second category. And then he also mentioned that among the structure, from the structure of the Qur'an, is that we have also the category called the mufassal. Mufassal are considered to be the surahs that are less than 100 verses. And then these surahs would be distinct because they would be from Surah al-Qaf all the way to the end of the Qur'an. And then we have also the al-Mathani. Mathani are the surahs that are often repeated. These are usually the surahs towards the middle of the Qur'an all the way to Surah al-Qaf. Al-Mathani. So again, the Sab'a, Tiwal, Al-Mi'un, the 100, and then we have the Mathani, the oft repeated ones, until Surah al-Qaf, Surah al-Qaf. Surah al-Qaf, and then we have the last category, which is Mufassal from Surah al-Qaf all the way to the end of the Qur'an. And then we talked about the rhyming prose, the unique expression and divisions of surahs into ayahs. We said that Qur'an is not necessarily a shi'r, it's not a poetry, but it is like a rhyming prose. And we talked about why being a poetry would not be that a good thing, to be just a poetry. And we also talked about if it is not poetry, but it's just a normal writing, then it will lose a lot of beauty in it as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it in a such a way that is a poetic, a rhyming prose, and He was able to deliver unique points through this way. Again, we have all of these recorded. People who are interested to know more about these, they can go back to those lectures that we have recorded. The other thing was the logic behind the repetition of the 5 sciences through different ayahs in the Qur'an. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps repeating. For example, the story of Musa alayhi salam is not only in one particular place in the Qur'an, but it is in so many different places. And when the story of Musa is being repeated, we said, it is not just the same story, but it gives different nuances from the life of Musa alayhi salam. Sometimes it is repeated, sometimes certain points of his story are repeated. And throughout these different occasions that are mentioned in the Qur'an, we have different nuances of his life and the revelation that came with him, and the way how he dealt with Bani Israel and Pharaoh and all of that. For example, in one particular surah, we would be talking about the birth of Musa alayhi salam, but you will not find that in other surahs. Or in a particular surah, he would talk about how the sea was split open. And then maybe that may be repeated some other place, but no more than maybe twice. In a different place, Musa can be mentioned for other miracles that he has performed, or for his conversation with the Pharaoh, whatever the case may be. So there is a wisdom behind repeating these stories throughout the Qur'an, or the 5 different sciences. So it's not just the stories that are being repeated, right? You have all of these 5 different sciences repeated throughout the Qur'an often. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about people who had the false belief, He doesn't criticize them all in Surah Al-Baqarah, but He criticizes throughout the Qur'an in many different places. When He talks about, for example, the other science that deals with the Day of Judgment, when He talks about Jannah and Jahannam, it's not only in one surah, but it is throughout the Qur'an in so many different surahs. So all of these 5 different sciences are being often repeated throughout the Qur'an. Another important topic that we talked about, or chapter that we talked about, is the science of Tafsīr and the categories of the people who wrote the Tafsīr. Tafsīr is the exegesis or the commentary of the Qur'an. And we said that we have the mutakallimun, the theologians who wrote tafasirs based on their field, on theology. We have linguistics who wrote the Qur'an based on their field again. We had fuqaha who wrote the Qur'an based on their field, which is the fiqh, the jurisprudence. And we had also the qurra who wrote their Qur'an based on these differences of the recitations. As you know, there are different recitations of the Qur'an, so they went into those specifics. And we also had the Sufis, Tafsir al-Ishari, who also, they also wrote their tafasirs based on these isharas, these symbolism, as we could call it, the al-ishara. Shah Waliyyullah Al-Dahlawi also talked about the gharaib of the Qur'an. We talked about these undefined but later on defined words, or the strange words. We can give another translation as like that. And also the amazing thing, the wonders of the Qur'an, the ajaib of the Qur'an. And that was among the latest topics or the chapters that we talked about. And the last one we talked about was the outer and also the inner meaning of the Qur'an, and also the huruf al-muqatta'at. As a matter of fact, the inner and the outer meaning of the verses of the Qur'an was a chapter right before the last chapter, and the last chapter was al-huruf al-muqatta'at, these letters that we do not know the meaning of them. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the meaning. Shah Waliyyullah, based on his own experience and based on whatever God has opened to him from understanding, he has put some explanation in the book right here. I didn't want to take you there, because if you want, you can read it on your own. I don't think it's fundamental. So it is there though. Otherwise, ultimately nobody knows the meaning of those huruf al-muqatta'at. These are the abbreviated letters, but based on the hadiths and based on the explanations of these, whether Sahabas or later on the awliyas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they did use these on particular occasions, the huruf al-muqatta'at. We talked about it in our last chapter. I think it was session 23, and this would be the 24th, I believe, right? So that's where you would have the huruf al-muqatta'at. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end blesses all of us with the right understanding of His book. And this is meant to be just an introduction of what the science of tafsir deals with. So all of this book is about you having an idea of what the science of tafsir deals with. And we also pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses with His countless blessings the great faqih, the great mufassir, the great Sufi as well, Shah Waliyyullah Al-Dahlawi, An-Naqshbandi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, and his father as well, who was a major scholar, a major faqih as well. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.